Welcome back to Intercultural Conflict Resolution. Last week I promised that I would come back to the topic of high context communication and culture, which is very much a part of collectivist culture. And I also mentioned I wanted to share some tips for developing intuitive intelligence. Now, one of our students has gifted me with this lovely book, The 40 Rules of Love. And this was written by a famous Turkish author who is in love with the Sufis, with the mystics of Islam. And I really believe that the genuine mystics of our time and previous centuries understand intuitive intelligence well. So you might want to take a look at this book. Today I had planned to show my PowerPoint last week, but I didn't have time. Let me turn to that PowerPoint today because I think it's going to help with understanding what I'm about to describe. I would like, hopefully some of you have, can we turn to the PowerPoint, please? Some of you have been introduced to the Johari window as part of your theories of conflict class. If you've studied holding these truths, my workbook, you have definitely been introduced to it in your ethics class. This model will help with understanding what I'm going to say about intuition and high context communication. It's a model that can be used in many ways in NCRP. And for those of you who somehow missed it, what you will see are different, sections. At the top, you see known to self, not known to self. And on the side, you see known to others, not known to others. Now, in intercultural conflict resolution, it is critically important that where you see the known to others, not known to self, the blind square, that somehow we figure out ways to build enough trust so that people are comfortable, parties to conflict are comfortable telling us how they are experiencing us. Now, in a collectivist culture, this is not so easy. In an individualistic, low-context communication, you can simply ask the parties to give you some feedback and hopefully build some trust. But if you are working with parties from a collectivist and high-context culture, most of them will be concerned about face-saving, and they will actually have rules, cultural expectations regarding authority that they will not be willing to break in order to give you feedback. It's quite complicated, and actually it's going to take the whole course for you to understand how this all works. But for now, let me say that if you need to figure out ways, and one of the ways that I have been able to navigate the need for feedback with parties from collectivist and high context cultures is to have private meetings with someone who either is familiar with my culture, lives in the United States, is very comfortable, maybe a young person, who's willing to bend or break some of these rules privately. Or, I will figure out how to have a cultural guide who can give me feedback in their own ways. And that often means that I need to be as intuitive and attentive to nonverbal communication as I possibly can. Because high context communication is not explicit communication like most of us experience in the United States. Oftentimes we need to be able to read nonverbals, check them out, since nonverbals in various cultures are different than our nonverbals, and somehow figure out, how to navigate. Now the unknown I don't need to deal with, what's known to self and known to others. That's no big deal. And what we keep hidden about ourselves really isn't a big deal in intercultural conflict resolution, but the unknown, which if some of you read Jung's book about the unconscious and projection, the undiscovered self, a book I assign in my ethics course, the unknown box actually is the largest box of all. It just doesn't look that way on the PowerPoint. It represents our unconscious, and Jung would say our collective unconscious. It is where we receive dreams, and it's how we intuitively figure things out. So that is where you need to rest with a lot of intercultural conflict resolution. You need to somehow, if you don't currently trust your intuition, some people have a very strong gut sense. Other people get shivers, quivers in their body. Some people, I have shared in other classes with Jung's Myers-Briggs inventory, I test as a strong intuitive, so I have natural intuition by birth. Some of us are just built to navigate this a little bit easier than others. Okay, enough for the PowerPoint. Let me tell you a little bit about Edward Hall's work with the Navajo and other tribal nations, cultures in the United States, and my own experience, actually. I have worked with many tribal leaders at their request, not yet in California, but in Minnesota, where I was practicing law. I was invited to speak at the White Earth Reservation, the infamous White Earth Reservation, if you know anything about tribal history. And I also had a Sundancer friend, very close friend, who was principal of one of the public schools, Lakota. And when I moved to Colorado, I had a lot of friends and mediation requests, including the negotiated rulemaking that you read about in Holding These Truths, from tribal leaders with tribal communities. And I wondered, why me? And I even became close enough with some of my friends to ask, and the first answer was you could pass. And I'm not going to go into the reasons they said that. I'll take it for what how they perceived me. How they perceived me was more important than actually what was true at the moment. I've also been told, as I work with people outside the country, around the world, that they don't see me as your typical American, and so they're more open to trusting me. The power of perception and frame. And if you would ask them, the Japanese managers I worked with assumed that all American women were over 6 foot tall, because that is what they had seen. I've asked others what their image of American is, and a very common response is blonde, blue-eyed. So they don't see me as American, and that helps me do intercultural conflict resolution. I believe, though, the fact I'm a woman and that I have strong intuitive intelligence has helped me bridge all these gaps. They often say humor is the sign that you understand another culture. That if you're able to get their jokes or they're able to get yours, then you've bridged cultural difference, you can work together. Well, with tribal cultures, which are very high context, implicit, unspoken understandings, rules about how people treat each other. But I would believe also, just like the Sufi mystics, a high intuitive intelligence. I was able to get up in front of a tribe and tell jokes, and they laughed, and that was not something I figured out by reading a book. It was, a gift that I've been given, and you will discover your own gifts as you explore intercultural conflict resolution. As I stress in other classes, please use your gifts. Rely on your gifts as you're building your NCRP practice, because not everyone has your gifts. Now, another thing I will say that has helped me, because sometimes I hear students saying, well, I need to build peace within before I can help others build peace in their lives. And having been married in my first marriage to a Buddhist priest, and knowing, some very revered Buddhist teachers of a variety of cultures, that is just not something that even enlightened masters are able to do in a lifetime. They have transcendent moments. We're not, unless you're on some kind of drug, normally you've got some agitation, some conflict, some activity within, as well as peace. But I would recommend meditation to all of you who would like to build your capacity to work with and understand high context collective culture. Because if you can learn to quiet and empty your mind and pay attention to the moment, to what's going on within, whether it's your feelings, an occasional thought, or more importantly for intercultural conflict resolution, what's happening in the moment with your relationship with a person from another culture, I think you are going to become stronger, certainly in noticing and reading nonverbal communication. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about how that's not necessarily a simple thing to do. But you're also going to be developing your intuitive intelligence. Now, I happen to believe judgment, we all have bias, judgment, and prejudice. Judgment at its worst when there's cultural difference is what Jung described as projection. The other person becomes the mirror of what lies within us. And if you're intrigued, I would recommend Carl Jung's works to help you understand that. The flip side is if you can notice the judgment, suspend it, let it go, and stay in that open, receptive, attentive place, you are going to be better equipped to understand other cultures. I have found my creative talents and my creative pleasures are part of, our divine mystery, how we can connect to intuitive intelligence, to our unconscious, to the collective unconscious. So if you have, for example, for me when I was a child, prayer included dance. That's just something that came to me naturally as a child. I grew up in a household where creativity was encouraged in all forms. And that was my experience. It still is. But in addition to dance, any of you who paint or draw, there is a deep meditative space that can be created where you access your unconscious, where you start to be intuitively in that zone place that I experience when I paint. And I also experience that kind of mysterious communion or higher connection oftentimes when I write and occasionally when I perform. So whatever works for you. I have an uncle, a wonderful godfather. Music is his form of, coming into that quiet, open space. I sometimes joke with my students that fishing was my first form of meditation because my father insisted we stay quiet and pay attention while we were in this, on this vast lake, beautiful lake. Certainly nature for many of you, the ocean, water, forest, mountain helps you with this. Whatever works for you. Now, I don't have a lot more time to talk about this today, but I would like to say we can't generalize or come to any quick, easy assumptions with any of this. For example, most Asian cultures are considered high context collective cultures. But if any of you have visited India or work with Indian colleagues, they can be quite low context, quite expressive, quite competitive, quite individualistic. So you cannot assume that all Asian cultures are the same. Do I need to say this? You know, we all know all Latino cultures are not the same. There's quite a bit of discussion even within Mexico about cultural differences. Let me talk before I end today about some of my specific experience with different cultures. People will often say, oh, you know, we're all human, everybody smiles, and they all connect at the heart. But smiling does not mean the same thing in every culture. And I'm a very smiley person. I think I was born smiling. But I know that when I work with my Thai colleagues, which is considered a smiling culture, that for them is a deep philosophy, way of being, of keeping their heart calm, composed, not losing composure or face. So their smiling is a much deeper phenomena than most of what I experience as American smiles. Let me give you one other. Nonverbals, using your body as I am using my hands to talk. Some of you will know that many Italians, Eastern Europeans, very expressive with their body. So when I do that with them, I gain credibility, I bridge. If I do it with a very stiff, stoic bureaucrat who thinks people should be, you know, composed and a certain way, conform, it's a totally different impact. So we have to test the waters and figure out what works for us. Okay, I hope you found this interesting. Have a wonderful week.